Hey everyone, this is Nick on Control Nick, and today I'm going to teach you all about the basics of a pivot table in Microsoft Excel. As always, feel free to follow along using the attached file in the video description. Let's head on over to the Excel workbook and let's get started. So here we are in our example Excel workbook. And actually, before we get started, I just want to explain what is a pivot table. And essentially, a pivot table is a very easy way for you to filter information in large data sets so you can get an answer to whatever questions you're being asked. And so, for example, I have a couple questions over to the right that we can quickly answer based off of creating a pivot table. The questions over here are, what were the total sales per region? Which salesperson sold the most? What is our top selling item in units? And which item generates the most sales? And what percent of our business is it? So, although that might look a little tricky if you're not familiar with how to use a pivot table, but once I show you how to do so, it's actually going to be very easy. And again, you can use a pivot table for a data set that has 1,000 columns and 1,000,000 rows in it, right? But for this example, all we're going to use is this table here. So let's actually get started. How do you create a pivot table? Well, firstly, what you need to do is you need to highlight the full data set that you want to summarize. And typically that data set will have headers associated with it. So what you'll notice here in row 1, we have all of these different headers, and that's where you want to start to highlight. You can highlight all the way down to the end of the data set at the bottom. So this is a simple data set. We only go down to row 46. So now that everything's highlighted for where we want to create a pivot table, I'm going to go to Insert at the top of my screen, and then the leftmost option is Pivot Table. So we're just going to select the main button here for Pivot Table, and you're essentially going to be asked whether this is the right table range. And for our sake, this is correct. It's between A1 and G46. And then the next option is, do you want to create this pivot table in the new worksheet, meaning it'll create a new tab for us in Excel, or do we want to put it in an existing worksheet? And for the sake of this exercise, we'll just use an existing worksheet being what we're looking at right now. So I'm going to select existing worksheet, and then it's going to ask you where in this existing worksheet do you want to put the pivot table. I'm just going to click somewhere over here. So it's going to start with the pivot table in this selection, and then I just click OK. You've now essentially created a pivot table. Now, it doesn't show anything yet because we need to filter some information to get the answers we're looking for. Now this pivot table has actually been created so that we can start slicing and dicing the data set that we have over to the left. When you click into this pivot table range, which is this full box that's highlighted with the border, you'll notice that you have different pivot table fields that will pop up for you. So in the top section of the pivot table fields, you have all of the different pieces of information that we've highlighted over from the left. So for example, you can see we now have region, salesperson, all the way through total sales, which goes from left to right in the data set. And then what we have in the bottom are 4 different categories or areas to filter within in the pivot table. Filters, that's essentially if you want to cut down pieces of information and filter things in and out, you can do so in this filter box. You have rows, it works the same thing as columns, and I'll show you a little bit of both once we get into the actual questions. And then lastly, you have values. So it's only numerical values that will go into that bottom right piece. Let's go through each question. I think it'll make a little more sense. Firstly, what were the total sales per region? So we need to understand based off of the regions that we have in column A, what were the total sales, which is from column G. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click into this pivot table range that we have here. And all I'm going to do is click and drag region to rows. And what that's going to do is show all of the unique regions from this data set. And you can see we only have east, north, south, and west. And then what we need is the total sales, which is column G. So I'm just going to go to column G in the pivot table and drag it into values because we want to see the total value in each. And the value section is going to summarize this for you. Once I click and drag it in, you'll see it does the sum total for us. So you can see East has sold a total of 11,730, North 12,520, and so forth. and it also gives you a grand total. So now that we have all this information, we've pretty much answered question one, right? So what were the total sales per region? We have that for every single region. And what's especially cool is right now it's not in order from largest to smallest, and it could be cool to see that, especially if you had a lot more rows that we wanted to take a look at. So if we want to see the ordering, all you would have to do is select within the sum of total sales column in the pivot table. So in any of these four different rows, and right click, and then you see you have different options here, right? So in a pivot table, once you right click in whatever space in the pivot table you are right clicking in, you'll get copy, format cells, number formats. You can refresh if you have a live data set that you're working with that can be updated. You can delete the pivot table, but what we're looking for is sort. So if you hover over sort, you'll notice you have sort by smallest to largest or by largest to smallest. Let's select sort largest to smallest. As you can see, now it's sorted the pivot table, so we have the total sales by largest region to smallest region. So it's a great way to quickly summarize and sort information from a significantly larger data set. Now that we've answered question one, let's go to question two. Which salesperson sold the most? Right now, we only have the regional sales splits, but we actually want to swap that out. And how would you do that in a pivot table? Well, all you would do is under where you have the dragged over region, you can actually just drag this to the outside because you see a little X pops up when you drag this over. That means you're going to get rid of this selection from the pivot table. It's not going to delete the data, it's just going to get rid of this filter. Now we have just the total sales sitting there because we don't have anything sitting in rows or columns or filters. What we need is salesperson. So I'm just going to drag salesperson this time instead. And you'll notice now you have the different salespeople that are selling. It looks like we only have 4 sales representatives here. So maybe it's just one person per region. And I've right clicked again because let's just sort it once again by largest to smallest. And you can see that Dana is actually selling the most and with Bob selling the least. Once again, now we can quickly answer which salesperson sold the most, and that actually checks off question 2. Now let's go to question 3. What is our top selling item in units? So this time we're not actually looking at sales, we're looking at units sold, which is actually in column E. Let's get rid of sum of total sales in the value section, and this time we're going to add in units sold. As you can see, now we already have the units sold by salesperson, but we actually want to replace salesperson with product. Let's get rid of salesperson. So we're going to drag that over and outside, and then we're going to drag product into the rows section. Then once again, I'm going to right click in here and sort from largest to smallest. So actually we can see that a mouse is selling the most and what's selling the least is Laptop Pro. Again, that's quickly answering question 3 about what is our top selling item in units. Now, you can really add some versatility to a pivot table by not just looking at simple row additions and value additions like this, but you can layer on top of each other as well. And before going to question 4, I just want to show you what I mean by that. Let's say you want to see, okay, who sells the most of which of the products? What you can do is actually drag now salesperson down, and rather than just putting this salesperson filter below, you can see there's a little green highlight that shows where do you want to place salesperson within the row section, which is essentially how do you want to order the rows. If we want to see the different unit sales by salesperson, then you would actually want to put salesperson just above product in the rows ordering. So you see the green highlighting now in the bottom right. I'm going to now let go of my mouse, and you can see that now we have every salesperson and who's selling the most of each product. Again, it just adds so much versatility to summarizing a large data set that you might have. Now let's get rid of product and salesperson, and let's even get rid of sum of units sold, and let's start fresh for question 4. In question 4, we have which item generates the most sales and what percent of our business is it? So we need to understand the percent splits of the unit sales. Let's go through this again because essentially we're going to look into the unit sales by item. I'm going to go over to the pivot table fields and drag down products into rows. And then go into, it says most sales. So let's go to total sales this time for each product and drag it into values. Now we have the order. Let's sort it again by right-clicking. I'm just selecting largest to smallest again, and you can see Laptop Air. I believe it showed that Laptop Air sold the least amount of units, but as you can see here, it actually shows the most revenue or sales. Now, although we have technically the answer, we need to see it as a percent this time because we want to just see the percent split. Once again, you can do that in a pivot table. So you can convert the number value to a percent if we want. So I'm just going to do the same thing as before to sort. I'm going to right click into this column. And if you go down a little bit, even below sort, you have summarize values by and show values as. These are super critical tools if you really want to easily display information in different ways. And sometimes it's just as essential to see averages or percentiles just as much as it is just to see the regular value. If you hover over summarize values by, you can see right now we show just as a sum, but we can show it as a count, as an average, a max, a min, and so forth. But for the sake of this question, we need to see the percent. So we're going to look at the percent of. And you can see there's so many different options here for how you want to show this number. Let's though stick with the percent of the grand total. So the percent of that 50,000 total sales that we have in the full data set, it's going to show that Laptop Air has made the most sales and it's 28% of our total sales. That's actually it. This is the bare bones of how you can use a pivot table, and I hope it helps you in your day-to-day. Again, it's quick and easy to use, and it's super versatile. There's plenty of extra features that I didn't go through that I might create an extra video for, but I hope this at least gives you a great starting point. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. As always, you can follow along using the downloadable file that I've attached to the description of the video. Please consider liking and subscribing if you want to see more and to check out other videos I've created. Thanks so much again and have a great day.